In the darkest moments of combat, heroes aren't born from training manuals or military academies. Sometimes they emerge from the most unexpected places, carrying nothing but raw courage and an unbreakable will to protect their brothers. This is the story of a man who traded his kitchen apron for a sniper's rifle in a single heartbeat, and how that moment created a legend that Navy SEALs still whisper about with reverence and amazement. The morning sun cast long shadows across Forward Operating Base Alpha in the rugged mountains of Afghanistan.
For most of the men stationed there, it was just another day and a long deployment that seemed to stretch endlessly ahead. But for Marcus Thompson, the base cook, it started like any other morning in his makeshift kitchen, preparing breakfast for soldiers who depended on his meals to fuel their dangerous missions.
Marcus wasn't your typical military cook. At 32, he had joined the Navy later than most, carrying with him a past that few knew about. Before enlisting, he had been a chef at a high-end restaurant in Chicago, creating culinary masterpieces for wealthy clients who never knew that their talented chef had grown up in one of the city's roughest neighborhoods. What they also didn't know was that Marcus had learned to shoot before he learned to properly hold a knife, taught by his grandfather who had served 3 tours in Vietnam. The kitchen where Marcus worked was nothing like the pristine restaurant kitchens of his past. It was a converted shipping container with basic equipment constantly battling dust, heat, and the challenge of creating nutritious meals with limited supplies. Yet somehow, Marcus managed to turn military rations and basic ingredients into meals that reminded the soldiers of home. His cooking had become legendary on the base, and many of the men looked forward to mealtimes as the highlight of their difficult days. As Marcus stirred a large pot of scrambled eggs, he could hear the familiar sounds of the base coming to life. Soldiers were conducting their morning PT. Vehicles were being prepped for patrol, and the constant chatter of radio communications filled the air. He had been at the base for 8 months now, and these sounds had become the soundtrack of his daily routine. The relationship between Marcus and the combat soldiers was unique. While they respected him for his culinary skills, there was always an unspoken understanding that he lived in a different world from theirs. They went out on dangerous missions, faced enemy fire, and risked their lives daily, while Marcus stayed behind the relative safety of the base perimeter, ensuring they had hot meals waiting for them when they returned. This dynamic wasn't lost on Marcus. He often felt like an outsider, wondering if he was truly contributing to the mission or simply playing a support role that anyone could fill. The soldiers were polite and grateful, but he sensed an invisible barrier between himself and the men who carried rifles instead of spatulas. He had joined the military to serve his country, but sometimes he wondered if serving meals was enough. Lieutenant Commander Jake Harrison, the leader of SEAL Team 7, was one of the few who treated Marcus as more than just a cook. During quiet moments between missions, Jake would sit in the kitchen and talk with Marcus about everything from cooking techniques to their lives back home. Jake had noticed something different about Marcus from the beginning, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. Jake was a seasoned warrior, with 15 years of experience and 3 deployments under his belt. He had an uncanny ability to read people, a skill that had kept him and his team alive through countless dangerous situations. When he looked at Marcus, he saw more than a cook who had chosen the safe path. There was something in Marcus's eyes, a quiet intensity that reminded Jake of his most reliable operators. The rest of SEAL Team 7 consisted of 6 highly trained warriors, each bringing unique skills to their missions. There was Rodriguez, the team sniper, whose precision with a rifle had saved countless lives. Thompson served as their demolitions expert, capable of taking down any structure or disarming the most complex explosive devices. Williams was their communications specialist, maintaining contact with command and coordinating with other units. Jackson handled reconnaissance. His ability to move unseen through enemy territory was almost supernatural. Martinez served as the team medic, capable of performing life-saving procedures under the most extreme conditions. Finally, there was Davis, their youngest member but already proving himself as a natural leader and tactical genius. The team had been conducting operations in the region for 4 months, targeting high-value Taliban commanders and disrupting enemy supply lines. Their success rate was impressive, but the missions were taking their toll. The enemy had adapted to their tactics and was becoming increasingly dangerous and unpredictable. Intelligence reports suggested that a major attack on their base was being planned, though the exact timing remained unknown. Marcus had overheard fragments of conversations about the increasing threat level, but as a non-combatant, he wasn't briefed on operational security matters. His world remained centered on the kitchen, where he focused on providing comfort and nutrition to men who faced dangers he could only imagine. Yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was building, like the calm before a violent storm. The morning routine continued as Marcus served breakfast to the early shift. Soldiers filed through the chow line, grabbing plates of eggs, bacon, toast, and coffee before heading off to their various duties. Each face told a story of fatigue, determination, and the weight of responsibility that came with their dangerous mission. Marcus made it a point to greet each soldier personally, remembering their preferences and asking about their well-being. As Jake's team prepared for their morning briefing, they stopped by the kitchen for their usual coffee and light breakfast. Marcus had learned their individual preferences over the months and had their orders ready before they even asked. Rodriguez liked his coffee black with 2 sugars, while Thompson preferred his eggs over easy with extra hot sauce.
These small details mattered to Marcus, as they were his way of showing respect and support for men who risked everything in service of their country. The briefing that morning was different from the routine mission planning sessions.
Intelligence had intercepted communications suggesting that a large-scale attack on their base was imminent, possibly within the next 24 hours. The enemy forces were believed to be significantly larger than anything they had faced before, and their position was becoming increasingly precarious.
Jake studied the satellite images and intelligence reports with growing concern. The enemy had been positioning fighters in the surrounding hills for weeks, slowly building their strength while avoiding detection.
What worried him most was the sophistication of the planned attack, which suggested involvement from experienced commanders with extensive military training. The base's defenses were solid but not impenetrable.
With a perimeter of concrete barriers, guard towers, and strategically placed machine gun nests, it could withstand a typical insurgent attack.
However, the intelligence indicated they might be facing a coordinated assault involving hundreds of fighters, mortars, and possibly even suicide bombers. The nearest reinforcements were hours away, meaning they would have to hold their position with the resources they had. As Jake's team discussed defensive positions and contingency plans, Marcus continued his daily routine in the kitchen, unaware of the storm that was about to break over their small outpost. He was preparing lunch, planning to serve the soldiers' favorite meal of barbecue chicken and cornbread, when the first explosion shattered the morning calm. The blast was so powerful that it knocked Marcus to his knees and sent pots and pans flying across the kitchen. For a moment, silence filled the air, broken only by the ringing in his ears and the distant sound of falling debris. "There you go." Then came the second explosion, followed by the distinctive crack of rifle fire and the heavy thump of machine guns. Marcus scrambled to his feet and moved to the small window in his kitchen.
What he saw outside made his blood run cold. The base's outer perimeter had been breached in multiple locations, and enemy fighters were pouring through the gaps like water through a broken dam. Tracer rounds lit up the sky as the defenders fought desperately to hold their positions. But they were clearly outnumbered by a significant margin. The attack had been perfectly coordinated, with simultaneous assaults on 3 different sections of the perimeter. Mortar rounds were falling inside the base compound, sending soldiers scrambling for cover while trying to return fire at targets they could barely see. The enemy had chosen their timing perfectly, attacking during the shift change when many soldiers were transitioning between duties. Marcus watched in horror as several soldiers fell under the intense enemy fire. These weren't just faceless combatants to him. They were men he had served meals to just hours earlier. Men who had shared stories of their families and dreams for the future. The young private from Texas who always asked for extra gravy. The sergeant from Ohio who showed pictures of his newborn daughter. The corporal from California who dreamed of opening his own restaurant after his deployment. All of them were now fighting for their lives against overwhelming odds. The kitchen where Marcus stood was relatively protected, located near the center of the base compound. Military doctrine dictated that non-combatants like himself should shelter in place during attacks, staying out of the way while trained soldiers handled the fighting. But as he watched his friends and comrades falling under enemy fire, something deep inside Marcus began to change. He had spent months feeling like an outsider, wondering if his contribution mattered in the larger scheme of things. Now, watching good men die while he stood safely in his kitchen, those doubts transformed into something much more powerful. The same protective instinct that had driven him to join the military, the same sense of duty that made him want to serve his country, now demanded that he take action. The sound of boots on metal caught his attention as Jake's SEAL team rushed past his kitchen window, moving toward the heaviest fighting. Even from a distance, Marcus could see that Rodriguez, their primary sniper, was limping badly, probably wounded in the initial assault. Without their overwatch capability, the team would be operating blind in a chaotic battlefield where precise long-range fire could mean the difference between life and death. Marcus stood frozen for a moment, torn between the safety of his kitchen and the desperate need he saw unfolding outside. Every instinct told him to stay put, to trust in the training and expertise of the combat soldiers. But a stronger voice inside him, one that had been shaped by his grandfather's stories and his own sense of honor, told him that some moments demand ordinary people to do extraordinary things. He looked around his kitchen,
at the pots and pans that had defined his world for the past 8 months, at the apron hanging on a hook that bore stains from countless meals prepared with pride and care. This had been his battlefield, where he fought his own quiet war against hunger and homesickness. But now, a different kind of battle was calling, one that would require him to trade his cook's tools for a warrior's weapons. The decision, when it came, happened in a single heartbeat. Marcus stripped off his apron, grabbed his personal sidearm from a locked cabinet, and headed for the door. He had no formal combat training beyond basic military instruction, no experience in urban warfare or coordinated assaults. What he did have was something that couldn't be taught in any military school: an unbreakable determination to protect the men who had become his brothers and the absolute refusal to stand by while they died. As he stepped out of his kitchen and into the chaos of battle, Marcus Thompson, the cook, began to transform into someone entirely different. The comfortable world of recipes and meal planning fell away, replaced by the harsh reality of combat, where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. He was about to embark on a journey that would test every aspect of his character and reveal capabilities he never knew he possessed. The base was in chaos, with soldiers running between positions, medics treating wounded comrades, and commanders shouting orders over the deafening sound of gunfire. Marcus moved through this mayhem with a clarity of purpose that surprised him, his mind automatically processing the tactical situation with an instinct he didn't know he possessed.
Years of managing a busy kitchen under pressure had taught him to stay calm in chaotic situations, to prioritize tasks, and to work efficiently under extreme stress, skills that would prove invaluable in the coming hours. Marcus moved through the battlefield with purpose, his eyes scanning for Jake's SEAL team while staying low to avoid the bullets that whistled overhead.
The base had been transformed into a war zone, with smoke rising from multiple impact points and the constant sound of automatic weapons fire echoing off the concrete walls. Bodies lay scattered across the compound, some moving weakly while calling for help, others lying still in positions that told their own tragic stories. He found the SEAL team pinned down behind a concrete barrier near the eastern perimeter, where the enemy assault had been most intense. Rodriguez was indeed wounded, a deep gash in his left leg preventing him from taking his usual sniper position in the guard tower that overlooked the battlefield. The team's usual tactical advantage had been neutralized, and they were fighting a defensive battle against superior numbers with limited visibility of enemy positions. Jake spotted Marcus approaching, and his expression shifted from surprise to concern. In the middle of a firefight, the last thing he needed was a non-combatant putting himself in danger. He grabbed Marcus by the shoulder and pulled him down behind cover, his voice barely audible over the sound of gunfire. "Marcus, what the hell are you doing out here? You need to get back to the kitchen and stay down until this is over." But Marcus shook his head, his eyes fixed on the chaos around them. "Rodriguez is hurt, and you need someone who can shoot." "I know you don't think I can help, but I'm not going to hide while good men die." Jake studied Marcus's face, seeing something there that he had suspected but never confirmed. The calm determination in Marcus's eyes wasn't the look of a frightened cook trying to play hero. It was the focused intensity of someone who understood exactly what he was volunteering for and was prepared to see it through to the end. "Can you actually shoot, Marcus? I mean really shoot, not just qualify on the range once a year?" Marcus nodded, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "My grandfather taught me when I was 8 years old. We spent every weekend at the Grange until I was 18. I can hit a target at 800 meters with iron sights, and I've been practicing on my own time since I got here." The statement caught Jake off guard. He had known Marcus for months, but this revelation about his shooting skills had never come up in their conversations. Looking at Marcus now, Jake realized there might be more to the quiet cook than any of them had suspected. The way Marcus held himself, the way his eyes moved across the battlefield, even his breathing pattern suggested someone with more experience than his military record indicated. Another mortar round exploded nearby, sending shrapnel flying and reminding them that they didn't have time for lengthy discussions. Jake made a command decision based on instinct and desperate necessity. He pointed toward the guard tower that Rodriguez normally occupied, now empty and providing the perfect vantage point for overwatch of the battlefield. "That tower gives you line of sight on most of their positions. Rodriguez's rifle is up there, fully zeroed and ready to go. If you're really as good as you say you are, we need you to provide cover while we advance on their main position." Marcus nodded and began moving toward the tower, staying low and using available cover to avoid enemy fire. The journey that should have taken 30 seconds stretched into several tense minutes as he waited for gaps in the shooting. timing his movements to avoid exposure to enemy snipers who were looking for exactly this kind of target. The guard tower was a 30-foot concrete structure with a small enclosed observation post at the top. A steel ladder provided access, but climbing it while under fire required careful timing and no small amount of courage. Marcus waited for a lull in the shooting, then began his ascent, moving quickly but carefully up the rungs while staying pressed against the tower's wall. Enemy fighters spotted his movement halfway up and began directing fire at the tower. Bullets sparked off the concrete around him, and Marcus could hear the distinctive whine of rounds passing close to his head. But he continued climbing, driven by the knowledge that Jake's team was counting on him, and that every second he delayed meant more American soldiers might die. He reached the observation post and immediately assessed the tactical situation. Rodriguez had left his equipment perfectly organized, as any professional sniper would. The rifle was a military-grade weapon with a powerful scope, bipod for stability, and several magazines of match-grade ammunition. But more importantly, Marcus could see that Rodriguez had already ranged the major target areas, with distance markers and wind calculations written on a small notepad. From this elevated position, Marcus could see the entire battlefield with crystal clarity. The enemy had indeed brought a large force, with fighters positioned in a rough semicircle around the base's perimeter. They were using abandoned buildings, natural rock formations, and hastily constructed positions to provide cover while maintaining sustained fire on the American positions. What struck Marcus immediately was the tactical sophistication of the attack. This wasn't a random assault by inexperienced insurgents. The enemy positions were mutually supporting. Their fields of fire overlapped to prevent American forces from advancing, and they had established clear routes for ammunition resupply and casualty evacuation. Someone with significant military training was commanding this operation. Marcus settled behind the rifle and began his work methodically, the way his grandfather had taught him decades earlier. First, he studied the wind conditions by observing grass movement and dust patterns. Then he identified the highest value targets, enemy fighters in positions where they could cause the most damage to American forces. Finally, he began the mental calculations that would turn his first shot into a precision strike. The scope revealed details that were invisible from ground level. In a cluster of rocks about 400 meters away, an enemy sniper was taking careful aim at Jake's team. The fighter was well concealed and patient, exactly the kind of threat that could eliminate multiple American soldiers before his position was identified. This would be Marcus's first target. He controlled his breathing, steadied the rifle, and squeezed the trigger with the smooth, consistent pressure his grandfather had drilled into him thousands of times. The shot rang out, and through the scope Marcus saw the enemy sniper jerk backward and disappear behind the rocks. The threat had been eliminated with surgical precision. The effect on the battlefield was immediate. Jake's team, no longer pinned down by sniper fire, began advancing toward enemy positions. Other American fighters, seeing the successful elimination of key targets, pressed their own attacks with renewed confidence. But Marcus wasn't finished. He had identified at least 6 more high-priority targets, and eliminating them would shift the tactical balance significantly in favor of the defenders. His second target was a machine gunner who had been raking American positions from a rooftop about 500 meters away. The fighter was partially concealed behind a low wall, exposing only his head and shoulders while firing. Marcus calculated the range, adjusted for wind drift, and fired. The machine gun went silent. With each successful shot, Marcus felt himself settling into a rhythm that seemed both familiar and surreal. The chaos of battle faded into background noise, replaced by the focused concentration that competitive shooters call the zone. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory, reminding him of the fundamentals: breathing, sight picture, trigger control, and follow-through. Jake's team was making significant progress, advancing through positions that had been impossible to approach just minutes earlier. But Marcus could see that the enemy commander was adapting, repositioning fighters to counter the American advance. The group of insurgents was moving to flank Jake's position, using a drainage ditch that would put them in a perfect position to attack the SEAL team from the side. Marcus shifted his aim to the drainage ditch and began engaging the flanking force. These were moving targets at ranges between 300 and 600 meters, requiring him to lead his shots and account for their movement patterns. It was challenging shooting under the best circumstances, but doing it in combat while under enemy fire tested every aspect of his marksmanship skills. The first insurgent in the drainage ditch fell to Marcus's shot, causing the others to seek better cover. But Marcus had the advantage of elevation and optics, allowing him to track their movements even when they thought they were concealed. One by one, he eliminated the flanking threat, each shot placed with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. The enemy commander, recognizing that his forces were being systematically eliminated by a sniper, began directing concentrated fire at Marcus's position. Bullets impacted the concrete around the observation post, and Marcus could hear the distinctive crack of rounds passing close to his head. But he maintained his focus, knowing that abandoning his position now would allow the enemy to re-establish their tactical advantage. A mortar round landed near the base of the tower, the explosion rocking the entire structure and covering Marcus with concrete dust. For a moment his vision was obscured, and his ears were ringing from the blast. But as the dust settled, he could see that Jake's team had reached a critical point in their advance and needed continued sniper support to complete their mission. Marcus wiped the dust from his scope and resumed shooting, now targeting enemy fighters who were trying to retreat and regroup. His ammunition was running low, with only 2 magazines remaining, but each shot needed to count. He selected targets based on their tactical importance, prioritizing leaders, heavy weapons operators, and anyone who seemed to be coordinating the enemy response. Through his scope, Marcus spotted an enemy commander directing the withdrawal from a position about 600 meters away. The man was using a radio and pointing toward various positions, clearly trying to coordinate a counterattack that would regain the initiative. Taking out this target would disrupt enemy command and control at a critical moment. The shot was challenging, requiring Marcus to account for distance, wind, and the target's intermittent movement. He waited for the perfect moment when the commander stopped moving and presented a clear shot, then squeezed the trigger. The round found its mark, and Marcus watched through his scope as the enemy's coordinated withdrawal began to dissolve into chaos. With their command structure disrupted and their key positions eliminated, the enemy force began a disorganized retreat toward the surrounding hills. Jake's team, supported by other American units, pressed their advantage and began clearing the remaining pockets of resistance. The tide of battle had turned decisively in favor of the defenders. But the fighting wasn't over. Small groups of enemy fighters remained in concealed positions, some wounded and desperate, others simply determined to take as many Americans with them as possible. Marcus continued providing overwatch, identifying threats that ground forces couldn't see and eliminating them before they could cause casualties. As the sun reached its zenith, the intensity of the fighting began to decrease. Most of the enemy force had been killed or driven off, leaving only scattered resistance that was being methodically cleared by American patrols. Marcus had fired nearly all of his available ammunition, accounting for at least 15 confirmed targets and probably twice that many assists, where his shots had wounded or suppressed enemies who were then finished by ground forces. The transformation from cook to sniper had taken less than 4 hours, but Marcus felt as though he had lived through an entirely different life. The man who had started the day worried about breakfast preparation and food supplies had become a key player in a desperate battle for survival. Every shot he had fired had been taken in defense of men who had become his brothers, and every target he had eliminated had been someone trying to kill American soldiers. Jake's voice crackled over the radio, reporting that his team had secured their objective and was beginning the process of consolidating their position. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but they needed to remain vigilant for counterattacks or reinforcements that might be moving toward their position. For now, though, the base was secure, and American casualties had been significantly lower than they might have been without Marcus's intervention. As Marcus prepared to descend from the tower, he took one final look across the battlefield through his scope. Bodies lay scattered across the terrain, some American but mostly enemy fighters who had chosen to attack a well-defended position held by determined soldiers. The cost of the morning's fighting would be tallied later, but for now, it was enough to know that his friends and brothers in arms had survived. The descent from the tower felt different than the climb up. When Marcus had scaled the ladder hours earlier, he had been motivated by desperation and a sense of duty. Now he was coming down as someone who had proven himself in combat, who had made the transition from support personnel to warrior in the most dramatic way possible. At the bottom of the tower, Marcus found Jake waiting for him with an expression that mixed respect, gratitude, and amazement. The SEAL commander had witnessed Marcus's shooting through binoculars and understood better than anyone how difficult the shots had been and how much they had contributed to the successful defense of the base. Jake extended his hand to Marcus, his grip firm and his eyes reflecting genuine respect. Around them, other soldiers were beginning to emerge from their positions, some tending to wounded comrades, others securing the perimeter for any remaining threats. The acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with dust and smoke, creating the distinctive atmosphere of a battlefield after intense combat. "Marcus," Jake said, his voice carrying a weight that hadn't been there before, "what you did up there saved lives. Rodriguez couldn't have made those shots in his condition, and without Overwatch, we would have walked into that flanking maneuver blind. You didn't just help us win this fight, you prevented a massacre." The words felt surreal to Marcus. Just hours earlier, his biggest concern had been whether he had enough ingredients to make the soldier's favorite cornbread recipe. Now he was being thanked for eliminating enemy combatants with precision rifle fire. The transition felt too rapid, too dramatic to fully comprehend, but the evidence was undeniable in the form of wounded soldiers who were still alive and enemy positions that had been neutralized. Rodriguez limped over, supported by Thompson, his leg bandaged but his spirits clearly lifted by the successful defense of their position. Despite his injury, the team's regular sniper managed a grin as he looked between Marcus and the guard tower.
"I watched some of your shooting through the scope," Rodriguez said, genuine admiration in his voice. "Those were professional-level shots under combat conditions."
Where the hell did you learn to shoot like that? Marcus found himself thinking about his grandfather, the old Vietnam veteran who had spent countless weekends teaching a young boy the art of marksmanship. At the time, it had seemed like simple bonding between generations, an old soldier sharing his knowledge with his grandson.
Neither of them could have imagined that those lessons would one day save lives in a firefight halfway around the world.
"My grandfather was a Marine sniper in Vietnam," Marcus explained, his voice carrying a note of pride that hadn't been there before.
He taught me that shooting isn't just about hitting targets. It's about understanding distance, wind, pressure, and most importantly, understanding the responsibility that comes with every shot. He used to say that a marksman's greatest skill isn't his aim, but his judgment about when to shoot and when not to.
The team gathered around as Marcus spoke, drawn by the story of his transformation and curious about the man they thought they knew.
Williams, the communications specialist, shook his head in amazement. "So you've been sitting in that kitchen for 8 months, making us meals and listening to us talk about operations, and this whole time you were probably a better shot than half the snipers in this theater?" The truth was more complex than Williams's observation suggested. Yes, he had the technical skills necessary for precision shooting. But combat marksmanship involved variables that no amount of range practice could fully prepare someone for. The stress of battle, the knowledge that missing meant friendly soldiers might die, the need to make rapid target identification and engagement decisions, these were skills that could only be developed through experience. "I could always shoot," Marcus replied honestly. "But what happened up there was different. I've never fired at another human being before today. I've never had to make split-second decisions about life and death while people were shooting back at me. The technical skills were there, but the combat experience, that was something new." Jake nodded approvingly. In his years leading SEAL operations, he had learned to distinguish between soldiers who talked about their abilities and those who demonstrated them when it mattered most. Marcus had done far more than simply hit distant targets. He had shown the mental toughness and tactical awareness that separated truly effective warriors from competent shooters. As the immediate aftermath of the battle continued, Marcus found himself involved in activities that would have been unimaginable that morning. Instead of cleaning dishes and preparing the next meal, he was providing detailed briefings about enemy positions he had observed, describing the tactical behavior of their opponents, and helping to identify areas where the base's defenses might be strengthened. The base commander, Colonel Harrison, arrived to assess the situation and debrief the key players in the successful defense. When he learned about Marcus's role, his reaction was a mixture of surprise and professional curiosity.
Career military officers didn't often encounter situations where a cook transformed into a combat-effective sniper during a single engagement. "Thompson," the colonel said, using Marcus's last name in the formal military manner, "I've read your service record, and there's no mention of advanced marksmanship training or sniper qualifications. Yet Lieutenant Commander Harrison tells me you engaged and eliminated multiple enemy targets at ranges exceeding 400 meters. How do you explain that discrepancy?" Marcus stood at attention, still wearing his kitchen clothes but carrying himself with a new sense of purpose and confidence. "Sir, I didn't think my civilian shooting experience was relevant to my military occupational specialty. I enlisted as a cook because I wanted to serve, and cooking was something I knew how to do well.
I never imagined I would be in a situation where marksmanship skills would be needed." The colonel studied Marcus for a long moment, his experienced eye noting the changes that combat had wrought in the young sailor. There was a steadiness in Marcus's bearing that hadn't been there before, a quiet confidence that spoke of someone who had discovered capabilities he didn't know he possessed. "Thompson, effective immediately. I'm recommending you for transfer to specialized training. Your performance today demonstrates skills that the military needs to develop and utilize properly. You've proven you can perform under pressure, make sound tactical decisions, and execute precision shooting in combat conditions. Those are not common abilities." The offer represented everything Marcus had wondered about during his months as a cook. Here was official recognition that he could contribute to the mission in ways beyond food preparation, that his skills and instincts had military value beyond the kitchen. But accepting would mean leaving behind the role he had grown comfortable with and embracing the uncertainties of a combat military occupational specialty. Jake spoke up, adding his perspective as someone who had witnessed Marcus's transformation firsthand. "Sir, if I may, Thompson demonstrated more than just shooting skills today. His tactical awareness, his ability to read the battlefield and identify priority targets, his composure under fire, these suggest natural aptitude for special operations work." The suggestions sent a ripple of surprise through the gathered SEALs. Special operations selection was notoriously difficult, with failure rates exceeding 80% even among highly motivated volunteers with extensive military experience. The idea that a cook might possess the attributes necessary for such demanding training was almost unprecedented.
Marcus felt the weight of the moment, understanding that his response would determine the trajectory of his military career and possibly his entire future. The safe choice would be to return to his kitchen, to resume the comfortable routine of meal preparation and avoid the risks and demands of combat operations. But the events of the morning had revealed something about himself that couldn't be ignored. "Sir," Marcus replied, his voice steady and determined, "I'd be honored to accept advanced training. What happened today showed me that I want to do more than just feed soldiers. I want to stand beside them and ensure they come home safely to their families." The recommendation process moved with unusual speed, accelerated by the dramatic nature of Marcus's performance and the urgent need for qualified personnel. Within weeks, he found himself at advanced training facilities, learning skills that built upon his natural marksmanship abilities while developing the broader competencies necessary for special operations work. The training was more demanding than anything Marcus had ever experienced. Physical conditioning pushed his body to its limits, while mental challenges tested his ability to make sound decisions under extreme stress. Combat scenarios required him to demonstrate not just individual skills but the ability to work effectively as part of a team where every member's life depended on the other's competence and reliability. Throughout the training, Marcus carried with him the memory of that morning when everything changed. The image of Jake's team pinned down by enemy fire, the sound of bullets impacting around his position in the guard tower, the weight of responsibility as he looked through the rifle scope at targets who were trying to kill his friends. These memories provided motivation when the training became almost unbearably difficult. His instructors noted that Marcus approached training with a seriousness and focus that was unusual even among highly motivated candidates. Unlike many trainees who were driven by abstract notions of heroism or adventure, Marcus had already experienced the reality of combat and understood exactly what was at stake. His shooting skills, already exceptional, became even more refined under professional instruction that taught him advanced techniques for various combat scenarios. The transition from cook to special operations candidate wasn't just about learning new skills. It required a fundamental shift in identity and self-perception. Marcus had to overcome years of thinking of himself as a support person, someone whose job was to remain safely behind the lines while others took the risks. The training forced him to embrace the reality that he was capable of being the person who took those risks and bore that responsibility. Jake's SEAL team, meanwhile, had returned to operational status, with Rodriguez recovered from his wounds. But the memory of that day remained vivid for all of them, particularly the image of their cook climbing a guard tower under fire, and then systematically eliminating enemy positions with precision that impressed even professional snipers. During quiet moments between missions, the team would often discuss Marcus's transformation, trying to understand how someone could make such a dramatic transition so seamlessly. Rodriguez, as the team's sniper, was particularly intrigued by the technical aspects of Marcus's shooting, analyzing the difficulty of the shots he had made and the tactical awareness he had demonstrated. "What gets me," Rodriguez said during one of these discussions, "is that Marcus didn't just hit targets at long range. He prioritized them correctly, understanding which ones posed the greatest threat to us and which ones needed to be eliminated first. That kind of battlefield awareness usually takes years to develop." Jake nodded, remembering his own observations of Marcus's performance. There's something about combat that reveals who people really are underneath. Some people freeze, some panic, and some discover that they're capable of far more than they ever imagined. Marcus fell into that third category. Word of Marcus's story began to spread beyond his immediate unit, becoming the kind of legend that military personnel shared during long deployments and quiet moments between operations. The tale of a cook who became a sniper in a single battle, who climbed a tower under fire and saved a SEAL team from a devastating flanking attack, resonated with soldiers who understood both the fear of combat and the bonds of brotherhood that motivated extraordinary actions. Months later, when Marcus completed his advanced training and received his new military occupational specialty, Jake's team was among the first to congratulate him. The cook who had served them breakfast on that fateful morning had become a qualified special operations soldier,
ready to serve alongside the men whose lives he had saved. At the graduation ceremony, Marcus wore the insignia of his new specialty with quiet pride. But pinned to his dress uniform was also a small decoration that few people would recognize. A miniature chef's hat that Jake had given him, inscribed with the words "One Heartbeat." It was a reminder of the moment when everything changed, when an ordinary cook discovered that extraordinary circumstances could reveal extraordinary capabilities. The base where it all began had been reinforced and expanded, becoming a more formidable defensive position. In the dining facility, a new cook had taken over Marcus's duties, preparing meals with competence if not quite with Marcus's flair for creating memorable dishes from basic ingredients. But in the guard tower where Marcus had made his stand, there was now a small plaque commemorating the actions of that day. Years later, when new soldiers arrived at the base and asked about the plaque, they would hear the story of the cook who became a sniper when his brothers needed him most. The tale would be told with a mixture of respect and amazement that military personnel reserved for acts of extraordinary heroism performed by ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. For Marcus, the transformation from cook to special operations soldier represented more than just a career change. It was the discovery of his true calling, the realization that his desire to serve his country could be fulfilled in ways he had never imagined. The kitchen had been a place where he could take care of soldiers by feeding their bodies, but combat operations allowed him to protect their lives in the most direct way possible. The SEALs still talk about that day, not just because of the tactical success or the lives that were saved, but because of what it represented about the potential that exists within every person. In a military culture that celebrates heroism and courage, Marcus's story stands out because it demonstrates that heroes aren't born with special qualities. They're ordinary people who find themselves in extraordinary circumstances and choose to rise to the occasion. The morning that changed everything began with Marcus wondering if he was truly contributing to the mission or simply playing a support role that anyone could fill. It ended with the knowledge that when the moment demanded it, he had been exactly the person his brothers in arms needed him to be. In one heartbeat, the cook became a sniper, and the SEALs gained a legend that will be told for generations to come. In one heartbeat, the cook became a sniper. The SEALs still talk about that day. Emotional story,